One sign of great eras is that the power of the spirit is visible and manifest in them. That was the case here. In the change of seasons, in religious observances, and in human life, no festival was possible without poetry. Most important, however, was the poet's role in funeral rites. After the corpse was blessed, the poet's office was to judge the dead. It was incumbent on him to cast a godlike eye over the vanished life and exalt it in verse, like a diver extracting the pearl from its shell. An extract there from Ernst Jünger's 1939 novella, On the Marble Cliffs, which was first translated in 1947 by Stuart Hood, but I have the new translation by Tess Lewis, which is published under New York Review of Books, and is a great translation, and I'll get to that. Now, firstly, the peculiar thing with this book is, in German, I think it was about 150 pages long. It's definitely a novella, and it doesn't really get close to being a novel. And this translation is roughly about 110 pages. 109, with a little afterword by Maurice Blanchot, which is extremely helpful. Where to start with this book, it's a very, very peculiar little book. And the strange thing is, it's 109 pages. And it's the longest it's ever taken me to read something that short. Usually with a novella, anything under 150 pages, I will definitely finish it within 2 days. And usually will finish it within one, because novellas are very much these encapsulated little capsules of literary life, which are meant to be, for me, this is the sort of one hit and you carry it with you for the rest of the week sort of thing. And so that's not something you want to drag on. Not the case with On the Marble Cliffs. Very symbolic, heavily stylistic language. Every single sentence could be taken and looked into for multiple meanings. And both stylistically, technically, and textually, a book which is doing everything in a way that a novella shouldn't. It's trying to tell a lot. It's expanding itself over an intense amount of time, even if it is doing that, which I'll get to. It's taking on gargantuan themes, and on a deeper level, it's taking on even more gargantuan themes. It's taking on so much. But if we were to begin with the basics, as per usual, we can begin with the plot, which is very simple. And I will take it from the back of the book and then sort of summarize it myself. But set in a world of its own, Ernst Jünger's On the Marble Cliffs is both a mesmerizing work of fantasy and an allegory of the advent of fascism, which I will get to. The narrator of the book and his brother Otho live in an ancient house carved out of the great marble cliffs that overlook the marina, a large and beautiful lake that is surrounded by a peaceable land of ancient cities and temples and flourishing vineyards. To the north of the cliffs are the grasslands of the Campagna, occupied by herders. North of that, the vast forest begins. There, the brutal head forester rules, abetted by the warrior bands of the Mauritanians. The brothers, these are the brothers living on the marble cliffs, have seen all too much of war. Their youth was consumed in fighting. They have resolved to live quietly, studying botany, adding to their herbarium, consulting the books in their library, involving themselves in the timeless pursuit of knowledge. However, rumors of dark deeds begin to reach them in their sanctuary. Agents are infiltrating the peaceful provinces that the head forester views with contempt, while peace itself, it seems, may only be a mask for heedlessness. So what is the plot, really? The plot is we have these two brothers. The narrator of the book and his brother Otho, they live in what really is allegorically a form of Eden up on the marble cliffs. The language in relation to the marble cliffs and where these brothers live and really everything they undertake is absolutely intoxicating, bordering on sickening. And Jünger is most definitely aware of this. There is a at moments a romanticism beyond any bounds, sort of an Edenic, and it is really an allegory for Eden, an Edenic style to the language, which is abundant with joy and reverie, and the minutiae of this sort of, for me personally, an ignorantly nauseating appreciation of plants, bugs, animals, but it's very sincere where they live. But for me personally, I'm not necessarily that way inclined, that I find the joys of springtime all that joyous. But in terms of the book, this Eden is given to you in this form, as this intoxication, these intoxicating gardens and herbariums, and this enter into an aristocratic vision from up on high in the marble cliffs. The marble, which is the symbol of this most beautiful, everlasting thing. And in this way, the narration, which is really a non-narration, because in a sense it's so transparent, of this ultimate Edenic, good, ideal place where the brothers live, being infiltrated by a vague sense of unease and evil. What we really have is good versus evil, where the good has drawn out its place, but the two people who are within the good have that prior understanding of evil, and so have sort of tried to get themselves away from it, but then eventually they understand that what they have needs to be defended. Now, there's these peculiar relationships with beetles and bugs and animals. There's, in a sense, a sort of a non-fear of creatures, and there's an acceptance of the cyclic and organic growth allowed. Like, time is allowed where these brothers are. And this is where it gets, and this is something that Blanchot emphasizes, this is where the notion of time in the novella is not so much emphasized, but not emphasized, because there's a part of one that thinks, well, this narration, this narrative is so transparently banal in a way, that why are we talking about it at all? There's these people that are in the good, and everything about this place is the utmost symbolic, romantic good. Marble cliffs and a herbarium and a botany, and we're reading all these old texts, and sort of this ancient aristocratic vision of glowing light on a hill, versus the head forester down in the depths who's coming with his band of the worst of the worst. This is a very transparent good versus evil narrative. So why are we talking about it at all? And this narrative doesn't necessarily fall apart, but it falls away, and you realize that Junger's appreciation of time is not so much timeless, like he's trying to write something that's timeless. It's out of time. He is, in perhaps a Sayrezian sense, speaking on behalf of things which are greater than man. He is speaking about forces. He is speaking with geological time and human's place within it. And what it is that the brothers might be defending is really something that they perhaps don't fully understand, or is, of course, way beyond them. And this brings me to just to address it early on. It brings me to the reading, the in a sense now the classical reading of the text, which is, we have this character, the evil head forester, the ultimate antagonist who overtakes everything good for the sake of it. He enters into a sort of a pure anarchy, not an anarchism which perhaps would have some political connotations, just a pure, heedless, needless anarchy, a real potent, nonchalant nihilism, which is almost taking over good for the sake of it. And there's a group of people which are under his control, who are just really the ultimate, in a sense, the cliche worst of the worst, committing the worst acts, with the Mauritanians themselves having a doctrine of semper victoris, always victorious, this absolute sort of nihilistic totalitarianism. Now, in 1939, sure, there can be this reading, and it's there, that the head forester is representative of Hermann Göring, of the Nazi Party. And this is 1939, and Jünger, of course, has his own biographical connections to the Nazis and even to Hitler, and he's sort of left alone, even though this book was banned by the Nazis, because it was initially read as this critique of that form of authoritarianism, totalitarianism, dictatorship, overtaking things. It's a very romantic and beautiful appreciation of that, and it can be read in that level. However, if you look into it, others read this head forester as Joseph Stalin, and really as a description of fighting the threat of Stalinism or communism. Now, I think perhaps when Jünger initially wrote it, though I think he's probably far smarter than this, that on one level, yes, it was more to do with National Socialism and a bit of a tongue-in-cheek way for him in his position to be able to critique this thing after his experiences in World War I and sort of going through all these isms within his life. Now, the reason I say this is, okay, he's writing this in 1939, and it is another 38 years until he publishes Homageville, but perhaps it was in the back of his mind, I don't know. Now, Homageville, as many of you will know, is his novel where he articulates the idea of the anarch, this figure who isn't an anarchist. You know, the anarchists would see what's going on in the world and pick up their flags and march and do all this activist stuff. The anarch is removed. The anarch sees what's going on in the world and then, okay, well, how can I align myself in relation to my own personal sovereignty within this world, because I don't really have the ability to change it. Now, I see on the Marble Cliffs really a lot, not in any specific figures, and especially not Otho and his brother, because they do go out and they believe there's something to be defended. But I believe that what we really see is the spirit of the world that the anarch is trying to commune with, in the sense of where their sovereignty is coming from. And so there's two other figures who come into the novella as representatives of two ancient forces, one of sort of nobility and one of sort of blood, but of fighting. But they're two ancient forces, really. They're representative of two ancient forces. And this is where the novel ends, in this peculiar moment of them fading away, in a sense. And I think Jünger really, in relation to the anarch, in relation to that sort of vision, this is a proto-anarch novella. Because the narrative itself, as I've said, is like, I would describe it as a condensed version of Lord of the Rings into 109 pages, which you'd think that's impossible. But this condensement of the battle of good and evil, and drawing in geological time and human time and all sorts of human archetypes, it's almost too much. But it becomes so much that eventually the humans fade into the background. You see it all as quite fickle, which brings to the fore some idea of some way that humans must exist within this. You are given an understanding of something which is beyond a merely linear time, and this is brought through by the descriptions and the perhaps the false idealism of those who live in the Marble Cliffs in relation to their appreciation of nature and of growth and of cycles. Perhaps they are trying to grasp it in a sense, but we as the reader ourselves have this appreciation that there's a cyclic, organic temporality outside of this whole thing. There is a geological time which is not beholden to any of these things, any of this sort of fickle good versus evil. We're going to take over this town and just for the sake of power. There's something which is outside of this, the evil itself spreading like a fungus, but there is always a sense that the evil is going to fade away and give through to another possible appreciation of some form of Marble Cliffs. And in this manner, this is why it's not necessarily a timeless novel, but something outside of time, where the symbols themselves are no longer symbols, but they just are. I'm not going to say they're the thing in themselves or anything along those lines, but Jünger writes this in such a sense that there is a determination which is nonchalant, and it's not from humans. But many of the human characters within the novella are accepting and understanding that they don't really have the agency, or they're not in communication with the determinant factors in the world, and there's always a sense of futility. And then this is why I think it's a proto-anarch novella, is because this futility becomes altered into sovereignty, a possibility of sovereignty, when we go through to Homageville. And so for those of you that I would want to put, personally, I would want to put On the Marble Cliffs as something to read before Homageville, as this question of what to do, because the ancient forces, the two representatives of the ancient forces, and we can think of someone such as Ludwig Klages or Ernst Jünger himself, these two figures which both were regarded by other people as consciousnesses that were out of our time. When we speak to these people, when we read these people, we feel like we're reaching so far back that we're now actually out of the modern epoch. That we would perhaps speaking to someone who had a connection even to antiquity or something along these lines. And the representatives of like nobility or blood and soil, or a noble violence or heritage, or divine right, even these two representatives of these that fade off into a sort of divine light at the end of the novel, well, they're gone. And I think if we hold ourselves to the false narrative of good versus evil, whatever that matters within this novel, which is very quickly made impotent, if we hold ourselves to that false narrative as a narrative, we are going to turn into an anarchist who is pulled into either one of these sides of this battle. One of which was originally passive and had an idealistic belief in their passivity, as they have what is right, and now that they have what is right, it should just carry on. And on the other side, we have the evil, which can just as easily grow like a fungus and pull everyone into it. It's much like the Nazi Party. But Jünger is, as always, as always, and perhaps this is the beginning of his anarch, his individual personal sovereignty in that sense as a political figure. The beginning of what these two ways are, dare I say it, two sides of the same coin in abstract. They are pulling people into a linearly temporal, very human, very transparent form of false political sovereignty, which gets rid of the individual. It gets rid of beauty. Both sides of it do, because they're caught up simply in their own mimesis. And both sides, in the sense that they are one and the same in the form of their mimesis, are one and the same in what the outcomes are going to be. And so, as a reader, if you stick to the idea of that it's just a narrative in the sense of a novella, and you read it as quickly as you might read a novella which had a narrative, like, I don't know, Animal Farm or One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Solzhenitsyn, you aren't going to be given anything. You are going to be left astray unless you're very, very politically minded. And you are going to feel a bit duped. But if you sit back and sit with it, and this is why it took me so long to finish and read, 109 pages, and it took me roughly about a week to finish this, which is a long, long time for me. If you sit back and let the symbols be what they are, and let it be outside of time, and I would emphasize spending some time with Blanchot's afterword, because it really did put the book completely into a great perspective for me. You realize why it felt so peculiar while you were reading it, why there was this sort of sense of not unease in the sense of evil over good, but a sense of unease in the sense that even if good was to win, there is a cyclic temporal determination here, which we didn't have any control over this, and the notions of these characters being, as in my own opinion, as purposefully two-dimensional, and that's a risky thing to say, but purposely two-dimensional in the sense that that two-dimensionality allows for a far deeper appreciation of the outside of time geological nature of the book as a whole. You know, the head forester who burns down the forest and rapes and sacks villages with his band of I think they're called glowworms, the worst of the worst, committing the worst atrocities. And there's rumors of this evil, you know, very much reminiscent of the scenes greatly filmed in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, of the far away the orcs sacking the villages and just burning everything down. This symbol of pure black nihilism overtaking everything. But in this sense, in a very, very human context, it's almost laughable for me at times, but it's not laughable because that appreciation is put first, but is put foremost as like a first foundation for you to pick through very quickly, like flimsy paper, and then see what that is on top of, which Jünger is trying to get through to here. The world itself is filled with and you know, I compared it earlier to Lord of the Rings. It doesn't come through in a Tolkien sense, but it's filled with an appreciation of a deep Christianity and a deep sort of old paganism, an ancient feeling of the divine, which if we were to think of the temporal trajectory of religions as going from something like Genesis, where we're talking about the cosmos and the worlds, then we go through to the Old Testament with Abraham and Moses, we're talking about tribes, then we go through to the Christian event with Christ, and we're talking about a small group, we're talking about apostles, and then we go through past the passion, and then we're finally talking about individual salvation. Jünger is taking us back from the individualist, or the salvation of the individual, you know, we might see in something like Augustine's Confessions. He's jumping us right back to feeling like we're in Genesis, and as if we're a human group. And what is a human group in a world which is speaking about things like Genesis, the book of Genesis? And this is the feeling that comes through. But the human beings and the human problems aren't necessarily put as simply pointless abstractions that just aren't worthy, but they are put in their place in relation to cycles and time and ways of time and geological time, and they're put against that backdrop. So at one and the same time, you can see the importance of them, you can see the futility of them, you can see the courage in them, but you can also see them like in their correct place in relation to that proto-anarch feeling of the sovereign individual. And for me, the question that is left at the end of this novel is then answered later in Omishville, is these ancient feelings, these ancient representatives sail off, and we are left. And we realize if we're lazy in our thought, we could go align ourselves with the head forester if we're bored, and go kill a load of people and align ourselves with evil, or we could align ourselves with the good. But you know, in almost like a Manichaean sense of inequality, that equality of that battle, there's something so much greater than it, which we could commune within ourselves in a sense of individual sovereignty. That's really my thoughts on what is a very, very short little book. I mean, it's 110. This translation really is fantastic, because the prose is peculiar. I only really read one little excerpt because it's written in a sense of sections. So I think we have 30. We have 30 sections in total, and they're all not aphoristic, but they're all contained. And there is a rhythm which is not fit for a novella. There is a rhythm almost like a how would I describe it? A rhythm of a divine, non-human, romantically symbolic manifesto about how the human can imbue themselves with some anarch characteristics to thus not be drawn into mimetic currents and the fickle things of war and verses. as in A versus B. And it's written in that sense, and the rhythm itself is such a plod. It's a great plod, but it's plodding along, and at times it's like a sludge that you're trying to work through. Not in a bad way, though. There's so much to there's so much to investigate in this literary and stylistic swamp that you find yourself stopping time and time again. And this is why the novella so quickly makes you realize this has nothing to do with narration. This has nothing to do with, character A does this, and then we go here, and then there's a finale, or there's these acts. This has nothing to do with that, because we're moving at such a slow pace that you read one section and think, blimey, I'm exhausted. Because you're not in linear time. Everything in it is both timeless and outside of time. All the symbols really come across as defenses or attacks on things such as aesthetics or beauty or war. We're not talking about singular humans. And so it's in this sense that the novella isn't a novella. It's a piece of time, piece of something, a glimpse. It is, to think back to some of Junger's other work, the more theoretical work in relation to history, it's Junger's stereoscopic vision of history, multi-layered and condensed into a single, we could say, frame of glass where you see everything at once overlaid and synthesized into each other, so you get down to like almost the noumenal core of beauty or war or good or evil. And so what are those human beings doing within all that? But yes, I think it's a great book. For me, is it Junger's strongest? Stylistically, Jünger, for me, in terms of how he writes in different books, is much like Nietzsche. He does different things all over the place. I mean, I find, for instance, I've mentioned it a few times, I find Homageville a very difficult book to read. It's not that it's badly written, but it's more like it's coming across as a manifesto hidden within literary style. This itself is heavily symbolic. And then something like Storm of Steel, which would be my favorite to read, really reads like a machine gun fire. Then we have the other novels such as The Glass Bees and things along these lines. And he's just a fantastic writer. He's a very, very eclectic and accomplished writer. But of course, once again, I would of course recommend this because one, I adore Junger's work. I think for me, Junger's appreciation of politics in relation to the expanses of time and the cosmos is possibly the most important additions to political theory in the 20th, going through to the 21st century. But alongside that, it's just a beautiful book, which I would read late at night in a dimly lit room and just let yourself get absolutely engrossed with it while drinking something like a porter or a red wine. But yeah, that's been my short review of Junger's On the Marble Cliffs. Thanks very much.